Record-shattering heat dome across the Pacific Northwest, centered on Vancouver and Seattle.
Atmospheric administration. Without rising air, there is also no rain and nothing to stop hot air from becoming hotter.
So this week, coming up, we're going to see feels like temperatures around 95 to 100 degrees in the major cities from DC to Philadelphia, New York, and surrounding areas as well.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. And tonight we got the guys' night. It is Antonio Reid, climate commentator, researcher extraordinaire, and Nicholas Humphrey, meteorologist. Thank you, guys. I am so happy to have you on. It's been a while since we did anything because I have been on hiatus, having to renovate my gardens and house. So welcome. Hi, how is everyone?
Doing well. Yeah, doing
Doing
very
great.
well. Glad to be back on.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I'll give you the rules for tonight, everybody. I am moderating. I may not be on all the time. This is a conversation with Nick and Antonio. They both have a lot of information to talk about. And if you have questions, please, I will hang on to them towards the end, and they will have a queue. If you put a queue in front of the questions, not for QAnon, but for question. I had to do that one. And I'm sure we will find our toilet flush of the show. And I mean, we'll do all our regular stuff, but welcome. And I am now going to give you guys the floor. Take it away.
All right. How's it going, Antonio?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Nick?
Doing well. Well, I can get started just talking about the heat in the Northwest. So yeah, how about the heat in the Northwest?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I've been talking about it all weekend and on Facebook and Twitter, and as someone that's lived in Seattle, I was born there in 1984, grew up there, graduated from high school there in 2002, was most recently there in 2009, living there that summer. This is one of the biggest events I think I've ever seen there meteorologically, and I mean I've been through windstorms and other in heat waves, and this is on a whole nother level. I mean I mean we're seeing temperatures there that are just far and above anything that is existed in the climatic record there, and some records for some sites go back to the late 19th century. Seattle has records that go back to 1894, I believe, and there are other places that in that area that go back that far, and you're just seeing temperatures that are just way off the chart, and basically what's happening, meteorologically, is that you have with a heat dome, a powerful, very powerful high pressure system that's that's formed over southern BC and Washington State and Oregon, and it's sitting there for days on end, block in a sort of a blocking pattern, and it's producing a huge amount of substance, which is sinking air. And as air sinks and through the atmosphere, it heats up, and you get these very high temperatures. This just happens to be a very, very, very powerful high pressure system. Record setting actually in terms of its strength, in terms of the expansion of the atmosphere and the heat being produced in the lower atmosphere. So as a result of that, today was a dramatic day for weather, for meteorology in that region. Seattle set its or tied its all-time record high today of 103. Set back in 2009. I was there for that. It was extremely hot. Those are the highs expected tomorrow. 112 in Seattle, 115 in Portland. Extremely hot. There were 110s in Portland, Salem, Eugene, Oregon today. So I mean, and most notable is what's happening in British Columbia. There was a record high temperature set at a location in southern BC of 115 degrees. That is now the warmest temperature ever recorded in Canada, and also the warmest temperature ever recorded north of 50 north latitude anywhere in the northern hemisphere. So I mean, it's incredible what's happening there, and it's hard to describe. There's an old joke that goes around in Seattle that the warmth and the sun don't usually come out until after the 4th of July. That's an old joke that you hear in Seattle a lot growing up in the 90s, 80s, 90s. Because typically you have this marine layer like you have in San Francisco, and you have it in Seattle, this area of cool marine air that pushes through and keeps it relatively cool until July. And that's been happening less and less lately. And you've now have had, this off the charts heat dome settle over the area in late June, and it's establishing all-time record high temperatures. It's establishing all-time record high temperatures in June that were typically set in late in July or early in August. So you're essentially getting Phoenix-like weather, temperatures that would be at or above normal in Phoenix right now in June, but they're happening in Washington State, Oregon State, and it's a threat to human health. Because most people don't have air conditioners up there. I experienced 2 100-degree days in Seattle, one in 1994, another in 2009, and we didn't have air conditioner. It was hot as hell, basically, in the apartment building that I lived in at the time. A lot of people don't have air conditioning, and it's a threat to agriculture. There's agriculture in King County and Snohomish County and Pierce County, Washington, the counties that ring Puget Sound, the east side of Puget Sound. There's agriculture in the Tri-Cities area of eastern Washington, where the Snake River and Columbia Rivers meet, and the Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland area, and they're getting temperatures of 115 today, where they grow wheat and stuff, and other grains and fruits and such, and they're getting temperatures of 115. They're going to have temperatures maybe of 115, 116 tomorrow and Tuesday. I mean, it's just it's extraordinary what's going on there. It's like, and I've heard that this may be, in terms statistically, one of the most intense heat waves we've seen anywhere in the world since July 1936 on the plains during the Dust Bowl, when places like Lincoln set all-time record highs. Where I am, there was an all-time record high of 115 in July 1936. So statistically, you're getting an extreme heat event that's as as powerful and as devastating as what you saw back then. So now we have climate change, which means, and that this heat event may not have been as extreme if it had not been for human-induced climate change and global warming that's already occurred, that's affected the local climatology of the Pacific Northwest. So we have always at this point, especially at this far along in global warming, have to really consider what's happened because of climate change and how this is affecting the climate and the weather of the region. So I mean, it's really extraordinary what's happening. I mean, in Seattle could very well face its first 110-degree day tomorrow, which would be incredible for that city. That's usually cool and relaxed in terms of its extreme conditions.
Wow, that's an absolutely sobering update on some of the meteorological conditions around the country. I think the update that I have is equally as sobering from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC leaked report that was aimed for February of 22. The report was leaked on Thursday, and the data that we're coming across from the report is absolutely scathing in terms of what's in store if we do not drastically cut CO2 emissions. And like you said, many of the perturbations that we're seeing today are quite extreme and serious, pose real threats to human health and well-being, and also infrastructural stress and ecological stress. The scientists warn that on our current pathway, the worst is yet to come, that our children, people who are born today, by age 30, will also see catastrophic levels of sea rise, rearranging global coastlines. The report warns that coastal communities are going to face a barrage of different climate stressors, such as sea level rise, exaggerated storm surge, deluges from hydrological events, possible wildfires, mega droughts, and famines, all related to climate change and a so-called 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius world. The report also warns quite direly that the planet will likely survive a dramatic climate shift, but human society will not. The report is clear that the levels of climate interference are likely to be stark and quite dramatic throughout the rest of the 21st century. Again, warning that it's going to be much worse for our children than today. And we've already seen quite dramatic impacts of the climate shifting toward a more warmer state. Like you've reported, we've seen heat waves now in the United States, Australia, Japan, China, and parts of the Arctic. Just recently, in part of the Arctic, ground temperatures had reached, I think, 118 degrees Fahrenheit. That's different than air temperatures, but it's still quite significant and historic for the region. We're starting to see the IPCC warns the destabilization of countries is very well possible linked to climate stressors. And then I also want to comment, because all this is happening contextually together, right? In the United States, we just completed our election in November of 2020, and the Democrat Joe Biden had come to power, reasserting the United States president at the Paris Accord and reaffirming our commitments there. Remembering that the United States is the world's second largest emitter in terms of CO2 emission into the atmosphere on an annual basis, around 5 billion tons annually. Historically, the United States is the top emitter, and per capita, the United States is the top emitter. And our Democratic president had offered in the campaign season, in the primaries, undercutting Bernie Sanders' $20 trillion infrastructure plan and Elizabeth Warren's $15 trillion infrastructure plan. Biden had offered a $7 trillion infrastructure plan, with $2 trillion being spent on climate spending over the next 10 years. This climate spending in the United States was going to be aimed at transforming the electrical grid, electric vehicles, electric car charging stations, weatherization of homes, and strategic coastal abandonment programs or planned retreats. This plan is woefully inadequate. Of course, if you follow along with the IAEA, or excuse me, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, and their World Outlook, the world was supposed to be spending close to $20 trillion on climate from 2010 to 2025. And we've not even come close to that level of climate spending across the world. In the United States, which is supposedly supposed to be taking on the lion's share of climate spending, the Biden administration, once it had come to power, had moved from a $7 trillion infrastructure program with $2 trillion specifically aimed at climate to a $2 trillion infrastructure plan with $200 billion aimed at climate over 10 years. This essentially is a rejection of the U.S. Pledges at the Paris Accord. That sort of spending, $200 billion over 10 years, is completely and woefully inadequate to significantly change U.S. carbon emitting systems in line with reducing our emissions with our Paris Accords. So that's the Biden administration. Just recently, the Biden administration negotiated a bipartisan Republican deal on infrastructure that completely excludes climate spending altogether now. The United States, as of today, the 27th of June, 2021, has no climate action plan at all. We are not in line with our Paris Accords. We've just been warned from our scientists around the world that we're reaching around 420 parts per million of CO2 into the atmosphere. We're seeing extreme weather events occurring all over the world, and we've just gotten a leaf report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that is quite dire and serious in its nature. And the United States, the second top emitter in the world, has no climate action plan to drastically reduce its emission to stave off the worst impacts of catastrophic climate change.
Well, all I can say is that that's one of the reasons I'm very skeptical that humanity will be able to turn it around, because you typically have the most powerful people or the most powerful governments. They don't want to do anything. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk, and they're not prepared to ask much of their societies to do the changes that are required to at least reduce the potential devastating impacts of climate change. And obviously, this is just another example of that.
Well, right now you have West Virginian senator in the United States. Is absolutely historic that the lives of billions of people depend on the politics of a West Virginian senator who is engaging in the worst sorts of climate action delay and denialism. And right now, they are using the Jim Crow relic. This is what, if there are future historians, and it's not clear that there will be, but if they are, this is what they'll be doing, looking back at this moment where one of the most powerfulest countries in the world that could have been leading on the issue are using a Jim Crow relic, the filibuster, to halt all progress on climate action And this is even at a time that our Center for International Strategic Studies, Pentagon think tank, is warning that we are on the verge of climate catastrophe, climate chaos, and global civil unrest. Antonio Guterres, the UN chief, warning that climate genocide is on the horizon. So these are the most serious issues that we face today. As an American, overwhelmingly, you have immense responsibility in what happens to the lives of people today and tomorrow. Your votes, who you vote for in the primaries, who you elect to your Congress, to your Senate, to the White House. The most important decisions that humans had ever made in our entire history. And in the United States, we elect people like George W. Bush, Obama, Trump, and the former racist Joe Biden. Our leadership has failed and refuses to acknowledge that we now have to engage in drastic changes in the way that we produce and generate energy in this country, the way that we transport ourselves, the way that we develop food, and the way that we live.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Sandy, we cannot hear you.
This topic tonight is heavy. I was muted, sorry. Of course, there's going to be one little thing. Hey, maybe I should give that the toilet flush of the day. Yeah, being muted. There we go. Let's break that somber seriousness for a minute. It's scary, but we're all here together. I deserve the flush of the day. Okay, so it's I'm watching the chat, and it's somber, but we're still here, so we have to, live every single day through whatever we're going to live through. And it's already been discussed, the prepping, a little prepping. I know what you're doing, Nick. You're gonna become FEMA. You're gonna run the show. You're gonna do it for us. You're gonna help us. Yes, Nick's gonna help us. We hope so. You might want to tell everybody what you're doing, just in case they didn't catch the last show with me, if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to be starting a PhD in emergency management at North Dakota State University this fall. I'm already doing a course this summer on issues in disasters and catastrophes. So I'll be doing that. I'm already doing that. I'll be starting regular classwork on campus this fall. I'm going to Fargo on Wednesday to actually look for a place to live. So that's I'm keeping busy.
Yeah, but it's good busy. We have to. What are we going to do? I'm killing myself in my garden, as everybody knows ad nauseum. And you're working, Antonio, and Jen's working, and Jim's doing his show up in Alaska. I mean, everybody here that's in the chat, we're all aiming towards getting through the day, watching what's happening. We're more educated than most. We're sitting in the front seat, Nick, Antonio, I have a question before we move on,
Sure.
or if we're going to move on. My one question is, do you think that this is the world government's Thelma and Louise answer to the problems?
I think that the world's governments, and it's interesting that you asked that question because, of course, the G20, the top 20 economies, just recently met, and they put forth $100 billion. Again, is their number for climate spending. That's the sort of global spending that they have to manage the climate crisis. Of course, we know that's woefully inadequate. In Dr. Jim Hansen, the former director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA, when he wrote in his 2015 paper, Storms for Our Grandchildren, Sea Level Rise and Ice Melt, he was aiming at that by 2100, the world would have to spend on par to $100 to $500 trillion to mitigate and to perform deep adaptation in the face of the sort of climate change that's in store now for us. And so, yes, the position of the top 20 emitters, the top 20 economies in the world, as essentially as they're not going to foot the bill on this, that they're not going to continue to take climate change seriously. And that's why the scientists warned that if we do not, then we face the deformation of human societies across the world.
That's, all the things I read about going on and drilling, I feel like my whole show the other night was all snark because all I'm reading is how we are just full speed ahead with destroying the Arctic while it's melting, while the extent is lessening, while we're looking at having a blue ocean event. And while I'm trying to be supportive for everybody here, I'm thinking maybe I'm moving in a new mindset of supportive, and that is, like you say, adaptation, mitigating the effects for ourselves, and supporting each other through till the internet goes out. If that sounds like a
Yeah.
SHTF comment. Nick, have you
I
got
mean,
a
it.
comment?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, they would have to spend ridiculous amounts of money and resources to do what needs to be done to try to mitigate the effects of climate change that's already essentially baked in, and they don't want to do it. They don't want to do the work. What's happening at a global on the global stage and is a reflection of human psychology. Humans don't want to do the things that need to be done if there's no immediate no seem to be an immediate benefit. I mean, I actually for one of my classes for my class I'm taking this summer, I actually had to read a book about the Galveston hurricane of 1900, and the setup for that disaster that destroyed Galveston, Texas, was 2 decades in the making. They saw
Yeah.
the hurricanes destroy Indianola, Texas, in the 1870s and 1880s, and the town was abandoned. And they saw that, and they there was even an effort by some citizens and even wealthier people in Galveston to get a seawall built in Galveston. But months went by and things went really slow. And even though the Texas state government finally allocated money to do it, nobody was interested in actually building the seawall anymore because time had passed and it was like, oh, it's not going to happen here. Things aren't going to go bad, and there were other things that happened in that storyline, but basically the threat wasn't taken seriously until it was too late and you had a disaster occur. It killed thousands of people. It's the worst disaster in U.S. history. It still is. Bigger than Katrina, bigger than 9/11, bigger than anything we've ever had yet. But it's a part of human psychology and in social issues, and so I think I always feel that sometimes scientists get so bogged down in what they know about something. Oh, we know that we can do these things. These are our solutions to solve climate change, and obviously we can debate how much those solutions will actually work to stop climate change. But there's things that can be put forth that would at least um, lessen the harm in the short term, in the intermediate term. But nobody does them because people don't understand. They don't necessarily understand, or are very naive of politics and of money and the psychology of people who deny, and it weighs on us. We're not doing anything at any level of government in this government to do what we need to do to try to blunt the effects of climate change. And even governments that say they're doing more than the U.S. and blame the U.S. for not doing enough, like Germany and Britain and other countries. Well, I mean, they have issues with their own issues with. I think there's issues with coal. Coal being continued to be a major player in Germany, and is in some countries outsource their fossil fuel and coal to other countries to burn, so say they're lowering their net emissions. They play these statistical games to try to make it look good on the spreadsheet. and it's not, and obviously it's not doing any good because our CO2 concentration, our methane concentration, and our nitrous oxide concentration in the atmosphere continues to rise, and we're continuing to get an acceleration of extreme weather events as a result of greater global warming, and we're on par to reach 3 to 4 C of warming by the end of the century. And I mean, I mean, we could be in for 2 to 3 C by 2050 at the rate things are going, or sooner than that if some of these feedbacks are more aggressive than we think, like with the methane in the Arctic and other things, or in the sea ice feedback. So I mean, it's dire, it's frustrating, because things can be done. I'm going into emergency management, which is all about managing disasters and trying to prepare for disasters and mitigate against, to reduce the risk of disasters and that do come. And I'm already getting a sense that emergency management is about trying to deal with this psychology and ideology and politics that in government to get people to do the things that need to be done to help your society weather the storm better than they would have otherwise.
And I just also wanted to comment about the IPCC and its report and warnings to us is that we have to remember that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, through its methodological process, is actually a very conservative organ. And so when the authors report that we are on the cuffs, we are about to exceed the Rubicon, go beyond the Rubicon in terms of climate tipping points, again, that's a conservative estimation. As Nick, you just stated, that some climate feedbacks have already been activated, and further warming, even to 1.5 degrees, will exacerbate these feedbacks. And so I think that it's going to take a lot to change human consciousness. And unfortunately, we do know, I am in mental health, I understand that oftentimes behavioral changes don't occur into some sort of trauma. And so, unfortunately, I think the warning then for the people of the 21st century is that extreme amounts of trauma is on the horizon in terms of the type of climate woes and damages that we will be experiencing. But I guess my call to action for people, at least generally speaking, is that, again, your votes do matter. Who Americans elect to their Senate, to their Congress, to their White House, these human beings are historically disproportionately powerful in the way they influence human affairs and human history. The responsibility that rests on the way that you vote is truly immense. And actually, I don't think it can be conceptualized how important it is, the decisions that our leaders make in the United States. And we have been making the worst decisions on terms of dealing with the environment and climate for over 40 years straight, with the election of the second Donald Trump phenomena, Ronald Reagan in 1980, who came to the White House ripping solar panels off the roof in a desperate cry for attention to try to say that climate science isn't real and doesn't have any meaningful impact on our lives. Well, we have to reverse and undo all that now, and we have to elect leaders that not only understand that climate change is real, but that we have to not perform moderate plans, but we need the most drastic, effectual, and meaningful, restorative plans that we can possibly imagine, and we truly are, if we want any chance of survival. And this may not mean for us personally. I think that's something that we have to wrestle with. But many people's lives are lost. I mean, let's be serious. When Texas failed to weatherize its electrical grid, people died during the Great Freeze of Texas. And then they were hit with distressing heat waves. And we had brownouts in the state of Texas. California is the world's 6th largest economy in the world if it wasn't part of the United States. and it faces rolling brownouts. They have to turn off power because uh, their infrastructure threatens to provoke wildfires that are historic due to the sort of droughts that California now is facing. So these are serious and real threats, and it doesn't take global chaos for these threats to be localized near you and the ones you
Yeah.
love. So I think that's what people have to consider as we go forward.
I want to quickly jump in. I wanted to say that I feel so bad for you guys, your younger generations, from my generation, and this is not the whole generational argument, really. It's just that I watched a video interview with Buckminster Fuller, who specifically just said it was 1974. He said we can be basically carbon free, fossil fuel free, and changed by 1995. This could have happened if we had had some brains in government. It's historically the idiots that just get elected and don't care, the people that only think about money and themselves. And here was a scientist, and he called himself an outcast basically because of his ideas. 1995, guys.
Yeah.
It would have
Yeah.
only taken 20 years to decarbonize. That's what he said. And I'm sure that if we talk to other scientists that were back there at the time, I listened to Isaac Asimov also speak in the 80s about the same thing. We missed the bus. We truly missed the bus. Now
Yeah.
we have to be
It was easy.
proactive like you guys.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been, compared to now, it would have been very easy to decarbonize in the starting in the 70s. Now because every year it gets harder, you have to do it that much faster if you want to try to limit the warming to 1.5 or whatever, and try to reduce the risk that comes with these tipping points and stuff like that. But I mean, it's 2021, and
Yeah.
the idea of doing it now so late in the game is
It's tragic.
yeah. I mean, it's rough, because now you're talking about in the 70s you could have done it very gradually and without it hurting people. Now you do it now, you could crush economies and hurt people that are least been affected by their contribution to global warming, but get the worst impacts from it. It's just it is tragic, and I mean, you have to do something, but at this point, I don't know if the in the political world, if there's a will to do it. It just I mean, even James Hansen, I remember one interview some years ago, several years ago, was basically complaining about just how much the tentacles of the fossil fuel industry are in the capitals of the world. Just how powerful they are in the capitals of the world, not just the United States, but everywhere.
They still are everywhere.
Yeah.
They still are everywhere. Everywhere.
I mean, it makes the smoking and the cigarette industry seem like nothing compared to fossil fuel. I mean, their power is immense in terms of money, in terms of politics and political gain. I mean, it's incredible, and it's killing us. The addiction's killing us.
Of course. Do you think, here's a question, segue a little bit of the financial sector. Today I read about Lloyd's of London coming out and saying they are completely divesting in coal and other fossil fuel industries. Antonio, I'll throw this at you first. Do you think that's a hollow effort, or is this something that could actually help at least get something going by this company, this bank?
Well, I think that any divestment in fossil fuels is much too late, much too little, but certainly a good thing to do. And I think that people have to kind of be a little bit more savvy than the PR scripted headlines that is often fed to us around, for example, the former Obama administration's Clean Power Plan, or what Duke Power is calling their transition to renewable and low emitting carbon sources. What we're finding, at least in my research, is that oftentimes these politicians and companies, when we look at the coal-fired power plants that are being shut down and decommissioned, if oftentimes because those power plants are no longer economically viable, it has nothing to do with climate planning. So I think that people have to understand that the business forces are kind of riding the wave of where the market points in energy generation. So if it's literally cheaper to shut down a coal-fired power plant and develop, let's say, natural gas wells, then that's where the economy and that's where they're moving. And notice that politicians had helped business craft the public argument that natural gas is a transition fuel. Let me be 100% clear on this question of natural gas as a transition fuel. Natural gas is a transition fuel to a hothouse Earth. And so I think that people have to be aware that there is no cutting the physics, the geophysics of the planet, okay? We cannot politic our way out of this. We can't lawyer our way out of this. We really do have to reduce our emissions in lines with the physical principles that sustain our habitation here on planet Earth. And these are very serious concerns. And in part, this demands that our public, what we're trying to do today, is educate people on these topics so that they can hold the people they elect's feet to the fire. They can hold their university systems that refuse to integrate climate change education into their collegiate programs. That's what we need. I mean, so the sort of activism that I think is now necessary is going to be from the ground up. And so that's the call that I have for people. And I think that you see, at least in our panel today, that, you know, people do have different talents and interests and ways that they can help communicate the crisis of climate change and proactively respond. You know, Nick's looking at emergency management. What I try to do is more political, and I try to develop people's consciousness and how they can use their politics to dynamically impact their community in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation, and also how they can push their local senators and congressional leaders to do the same on a national level.
I think that's going to happen in Buffalo with the mayoral race of India Walton beating Byron Brown, who was, you know, a very popular mayor. But I think she's got that kind of city plan and progressive. So, you know, we may think the long game we can't win, but we sure as hell can't give up trying. No, I was so proud of Buffalo. And so you have a point when you talk about this is really critical, and I'm thanking you for doing this and stepping up onto this mantle, Antonio. And you too, Nick, for stepping on the mantle of wanting to help people. And because right now I'm stepping off the mantle and all I want to do is never leave the place, grow vegetables and hunker down. And when it happens, I'm just like, you know, I mean, I'm at that stage.
I had a comment. I earlier, you were talking about trauma, climate, climatic trauma to get people's attention, and I wonder about that because there was somebody commented on one of my posts on Facebook this weekend when I was talking about the extreme heat, and there was a discussion of what it's like living in Trumplandia and dealing with climate deniers and everything, and they would be like, oh, they could be 120 degrees in December and they still wouldn't believe in climate change, and they die on that hill of denying climate change. And it's like you wonder, like, what does it take in terms of traumatic event to get people's attention, because obviously we're looking at this incredible heat in the Northwest, but
Oh,
it's already a part of the country where at least the Western, Northwest is pretty astute towards what's going on with climate change, and they're going to be
mhm.
facing or are facing these crazy events. And we've had Hurricane Harvey in Texas. We've had Hurricane Dorian, which mostly impacted Bahamas, but the U.S. got to see it up close and personal with what's going on there. We've had we see all these things, and yet it's still there's some kind of tipping point with humanity's view of climate change. It hasn't quite gotten there yet. I mean, it seems like in the U.S., most people understand that climate change is actually real. Even some Republicans do, but yet most majority of people don't necessarily believe it's going to personally affect them,
Yeah.
and that's
And
that's that's the strangest thing.
well,
You
that's
believe
like
it's real, but
denial.
yeah, it won't firstly affect you. And when will that what will it take to get to that critical mass where people understand 60, 70, 80% of people understand, oh, it's going to affect me. It already is. And I don't know when or if we'll get to that point. I hope so. I hope we do. Because you could see so much done if we do, from holding politicians to the fire and on climate change, to climate mitigation strategies to reduce emissions, to adaptation strategies to help people and other species ride through this storm that we know is going to get worse globally. But we're still waiting to get to that point, I think.
Well, yeah, we are. We've got a pretty good chat going, and we have environmentalists having politicians to the fire, holding them is a joke. Well, I want to say they don't all enter that way. And so, what we need to peel back and uncover, and we already know it's money in politics. And that's what, the buying off of your politicians has been going on in our country forever. So it's also getting money out of politics. Will any of this happen, Antonio? I hope for you, there's the hope word, but for your sake and your generation, that the things you're fighting for do happen.
Well,
This fight.
unfortunately, I'm not optimistic. Um, I think that's in part that I'm also a Negro American, and that's my perspective on American plantation politics.
Yeah.
I mean, really, to me, what's also interesting is that we've been trying to achieve universal health care since 1993, about the same time that the IPCC released its first climate report. And we both, on both those issues, we were able to delay action. And on both of those issues, we failed in terms of public policy. And so, to me, I think realistically, we are in for the worst that the climate IPCC assessment warns. That is something that I struggle with on a daily basis. Of course, my oldest brother just had my niece. My second
Yeah.
brother, his fiance is pregnant and is due in July. And of course, I've been an uncle for 2 years now. And so when the report says people born today, I look directly at my niece and my nephews, and I can see, by the time they're my age, I'm 28. Well, I'm turning 28 in September, so I'm close to 30 now. Um, the world will be in an irrecognizable state, certainly in terms of human, social, cultural, economic, and political affairs. And that's really difficult to grapple with. And every year that we go on, These very, very conservative reports detail a increasingly dire situation in a time period that is closer and closer from being on the horizon. So it is hard to deal with. It is hard to grapple with. When I talk about trauma, in response to what Nick said, what I've noticed in my study of people who have mental illnesses and disabilities is that people respond very differently to trauma. It's not at all the case that people respond productively to trauma and recognize what's causing the trauma and then act effectively as to avoid what's causing the trauma. In fact, we see, for example, with battered woman syndrome or battered wife syndrome, that oftentimes women in particularly violent relationships stay in those relationships, and they can clearly identify who is causing the harm, but the way that they internalize that and how they deal with it then emotionally and intellectually gives them a false kind of sense of dealing with it, because they actually don't deal with it. They don't get away from the harm. In fact, they get closer to it. So you see that the way that human psychology deals with trauma is actually incredibly dynamic. So when I say that, on the horizon, people are going to respond to trauma, it's not necessarily that they're going to respond productively. Some people who will be traumatized will go into total panic mode, total stress, total denial. You certainly will see that. And that's something that we have to be aware about. One thing that I would like to see our public move toward is developing public health centers, because people who lose their homes, their livelihoods, that doesn't matter what your ideology is. That impacts your being here, your existence, your life, and humans respond to those sort of threats in very socially apparent ways. And so that's something that we're going to also have to take seriously, because some people are going to lose their lives and livelihoods and homes and businesses in the United States due to this. And many of those people will be our friends, families, and neighbors. And so I think we have to talk about, how do we cope with that as well?
I would say that sounds like a plan, about coping with these things. You've nailed a lot of stuff here. You really did. Oh boy. Yes, I need a breath. It gave me pause here. A lot of thinking. Well, guys, we've got some questions, and I think we'll segue into questions. How's that sound?
Sure.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. I will bring up the first one that I didn't. The chat's going pretty fast, so Kevin Stansholzer, if you're still here, okay. I guess this one could go out to Nick. Prediction for rest of this summer.
As far as the rest of summer, it's looking continued hot out west and in the northern plains. Continued drought. The drought's not going to let up at all in this summer throughout the west and the northern plains. I'm moving to North Dakota, which is in severe to extreme drought, and then it extends out west, and obviously most of the west is in drought. It's going to get worse in the northwest because of this heat wave they're having. So it's we could be dealing with. I'm very concerned about the fire season, this summer, and obviously the Santa Ana and Diablo winds really kick up in the fall in California. Worried about that. So it's going to be probably a bad year for drought, for water resources, and for fire. So and heat, more heat.
Thanks, Nick. Kevin said. Okay, let's see if we can go on to another one. Tanya. Oh, she just did. All right, this is Can we all just pick up somewhere, anywhere near Sandy, to get some land to end this thing with friends who want to try to mitigate the end times together? Well, this is you know what, at least Collapse Chronicle Sam Mitchell, and we are now 2 hours apart from a whole family of people of people that think us the same, you know. And so who knows, if you want to move on the stretch of 86 and the southern tier from central New York to western New York, it's probably as good a place as any. Thank you, Tanya. Okay, I have another question here. This was a comment from earlier, but when I was talking about how Buckmeister Fuller said we could decarbonize from, it was in 1974. Rich said it was easier to decarbonize at 3 billion, not now.
Yeah.
And that also takes into account all the people in the countries that want to attain the lifestyles that they are being, you know, that they see, and minimizing their lifestyles to, you know, something that is not advantageous for them. They want to live like, everybody wants to live like Americans. Everybody wants to live like Americans.
Well, reality is, I was just going to say, the reality is Americans are that need to reduce significantly. Yeah, but yeah, not going to happen.
Well, just to add to what Rich is saying, the recently released report from the IPCC goes in and talks about how it's not just climate alone, but these additional pressures of urbanization and population are making it more difficult for us to adapt and mitigate a lot of the threats of climate change. And so we're really seeing those pressures. I mean, look at what's happening in terms of the urban heat island effect in many of these places that are being hit with heat domes. Well, one of the things that localizes or increases is the localized temperatures are, well, the built environment itself, the construction materials that we use, the asphalt, the bricks, and things like that, but also about air conditioning. So when these places are hit with extreme heat, well, what people start doing is buying more air conditioners. That's a very easy way to mitigate the local impact on yourself, is to buy an air conditioner. Well, when people do that, the way that air conditioners work is that they take the hot air that's in your house and push it outside and replace it with cool air. But when you do that, you're actually compounding the local temperature effect, so that it adds to the urban heat island impact. And we see this particularly over big metropolitan areas. And so our cities actually can exaggerate the impacts for climate locally because of the way that they're built and some of the systems that we have that operate in our cities. And so that's something that people have to be conscious of as well, is that, you know, this whole project of hyper urbanization and, you know, this huge resource use and mismanagement of land development, all those things have what I call climate points, is that they contribute to the worsening of the climate.
Yeah, that's what's happened in Phoenix. Phoenix has gotten much hotter, especially at night, with the radiance of heat back off because of urbanization and just more urban environment than in the 60s and 70s, and it's contributed to more 80 and 90 degree nights in Phoenix, Arizona. So it gets very hot during the day and stays hot at night. And of course, everybody has air conditioners there, and it contributes even worse. So it's a sort of a human-induced feedback where they're continuously trying to stay cool and do but grow at the same time, and it contributes to their roasting climate, localized climate.
Okay, let's see. What can I come up with next? Everybody is
I saw
there are.
I saw a comment that someone said they thought Seattle was safe, and
Yeah,
they were wrong.
they were wrong. That was
uh,
yeah.
I I knew from previous reports over the like climate reports and stuff over the years. I think the U.S. government's done climate reports and stuff like that a few years ago, climate assessments. That I knew that Seattle was already getting hotter and drier and everything else. I knew a day like this would come, but it actually see it happening before my eyes is a whole nother different story. It's kind of a loss of the past where you could depend on the weather and the climate being temperate, and now it's like Phoenix.
And even here, we were under a heat advisory. It got up to 88, and at my girlfriend Karen's over in Ithaca, it was 91. They're not; these are not temperatures for the end of June in Western New York or Central New York at all. Nothing's the same, and it is it's scary. It's a little scary. Maybe that's a lot of our responses to getting rid of stuff that's not needed and not hoarding, but preparing for what you might need to hunker down. Oh, I had a comment about, we just have to go back. I have a generator in my basement. And Antonio, you had been talking about how they try to tell us that the it's a bridge fuel, it's clean fuel. So I'm looking at this generator that I got for a gift. It's a pretty big generator, and the box says clean, environmentally friendly propane. Oh my God, I never saw that. I got this thing in 2015 as a gift, never hooked it up, and now I'm deciding, well, do I want to have it as a backup to whatever I can try to find that I might be able to someday afford as solar? But that's what it said, and I just about fell over right in my basement. Oh my God. All right.
That should on our tombstone when our species goes out. It should be marked "clean bullshit." And I took the
Clean
thunder.
bullshit. Oh
But
my
yeah,
God.
I was just going to mention that I don't want people to panic unproductively. I think what we want now is a sort of productive panic, because this is worrying. Just in my lifetime, this last 30 years, to used to have memories in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where you could hope for a white Christmas. We don't get a lot of snow, but it was reasonable when I was growing up to hope for a white Christmas. It is completely ridiculous today, to even think about that. And that should not happen in the course of a human lifetime, that we become so disassociated from our climate context. And that's very alarming. And so I think that as people see, people like us who are at least aware about climate change in general, and even people who don't hold our views start to see these events happening, there is going to be some stress. There is going to be like Nick says, a sort of sense of loss, when we think about, really today in terms of the climate is the best day we're going to have. Tomorrow is always going to be a little worse, and soon enough much worse. So people have to think about that. A lot of times I think about these reports. Cities like Seattle, yeah, sure, they get all the attention, but I remember in April here in North Carolina, we were around 90 degrees every day for the last 2 weeks of April, and the average temperature for us is like 75 degrees for that time of year. So we were getting, and 88 degrees is the average high for July and August for us. So we were getting above the average high temperatures for the hottest part of the year in April. And that really is catastrophic in terms of how it stresses the local ecology. Like you say, us humans, we just run inside and turn on the air conditioning, we power up the air conditioning, and that's kind of how we escape the localized warming. But the animals, the flora and fauna outside, can't escape those impacts, and so we have to be mindful of not just human life, but the biosphere in its entirety.
Absolutely. Okay. You're right. I mean, as you were talking, I was just imagining everything you were saying that what we have to do. Okay, this is very important. Stay calm, mobilize now. Also, prep your bug out bags and HEPA filter fans for those in wildfire zones. It's not extremist to say because you can have a hurricane, a tornado, a fire, a heat event, the hail. In the video I made opening up, the hail that they in Eastern Europe that was
Yeah.
there was some record size hails. I mean, this is all over the world, and people need to
And Nick, I
prepare
wanted to ask,
themselves.
didn't the National Hurricane Center, what was their warning? What was their projection for this season, this hurricane season?
Above average. Not they're not expecting anything like last season, but yeah, above average season where we'll have more storms, more hurricanes than average. So, yeah, I mean the threat is out there this year for more storms that could potentially impact the United States.
And
The
here's
thing
the nice
about,
part.
well, I'll say this really quickly about hurricanes. The thing about hurricanes is, first of all, I don't like for people to try to conceptualize climate change in terms of hurricanes and tornadoes, because it's a really easy way to kind of perceive climate change. But the danger that hurricanes um, carry is the fact that they can be the size of states or bigger, and it doesn't
Yeah.
take three or four major hurricanes to be historic. It actually just takes one really strong hurricane. So even
Yeah,
when the National Hurricane Center, for example, would say, "Oh, we're in for maybe a moderately above average season," it only takes one catastrophic hurricane to make history. And so we
yeah.
so we
I
increased.
mean Hurricane Andrew, for example. Yeah, it was a dead
Hmm.
season in '92, and you had Hurricane Andrew. uh, Devastate South Florida. I mean, just took one. That's all it takes.
Okay, just one. Well, I'm going to then add this question from Rich Diana. And question, is the jet stream getting erratic? Kind of folds into this last little bit. Nick, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. It's among the leading climate scientists, it's still a big argument about how much climate change is affecting the jet stream versus the existing natural variability. I've noticed that sort of perusing Twitter and looking over people, and there's still a lot of argument about that. Although there is some clarity that there may be more summertime blocking patterns where high pressure systems sit over the same place for days or weeks on end, producing tons of extreme heat. It seems a little bit more consensus on summertime patterns versus wintertime patterns, where the jet stream is in a normal, stable climate is pretty wild and erratic as it is. In the summertime, you expect a little bit more stability with the jet stream, but you get these huge wave patterns that block and sit in the same place for days to weeks on end, producing extreme heat events that, of course, can be devastating to human health and agriculture and cause a lot of droughts, the heat domes, as you call them, like we're seeing over Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest after, like we saw over the Southwest a couple weeks ago, like we're seeing over Eastern Europe, sitting over Eastern Europe. They're getting a lot of June all-time record highs in Russia and Ukraine and Azerbaijan and all these
Oh, yeah.
various places. So yeah,
Yes, we sure are. I'm always distressed at when you see the temperatures up there, and then that's faster permamush, as Jennifer says. Okay, here's a good one. This kind of segues a little differently. Do you think that the loss of fertility from a hot planet might help reduce the overall population numbers at any significant rate? Whoever wants to go for that one, that's an interesting one. I mean, it's
Yeah, I
happening.
don't. It's certainly true that when you push animals outside of their natural climate zones, that can have exhaustive impacts on the biological reproduction capacities. But I think that yes, it's true that our species is experiencing a recession in our fertility. I think that has more to do with actually the amount of toxins that we expose ourselves to on the
Yeah,
daily for operating industrial civilization. One of the
I
things
tend
that I
to
think
agree.
is linked to the decreased fertility is the fact that fossil fuels are not just killing the climate; they're actually killing you in the forms of plastic. We know that plastic is a byproduct of oil production, and we know that each human today consumes, on average, a credit card's worth of plastic. Uh, so, I mean, that could have something to do. Do I think that those sort of declines in our fertility yields are going to matter in terms of reducing the climate in line, or excuse me, reducing our population's impact in line with averting climate catastrophe? Absolutely not. It would take over the course of the 22nd century, um, based on just fertility rates alone, to put our population in line with minimizing those impacts back to the level of perhaps 2 or 3 billion people. So I don't think that's going to be fast enough. We are going to have very concerted efforts in terms of lowering our emissions. This is not going to be something that
Absolutely.
gradually or accidentally happens.
No, this is the
Hey,
something of you and Nick's lifetimes. It's the something. This is the biggest challenge of your lifetimes. Mine is just to stay alive long enough to see it.
yeah. I mean,
Oh,
I think unfortunately it will be ecological damage and climate chaos and pollution will be the things that lower population at some point in the future. Um, don't know when exactly, but that will be what does it. And unfortunately, it won't be, uh, it'll be an effect of those things, not something that happens. Um, it happens first. It'll be an effect of the increasing damage to the planet.
yeah, where it's a triple header. Okay, let's see. I'm going to keep going because this is a really good show for me. I hope for everybody. We're all together, and there's a lot of conversation going on. Uh, let's see. Well, of course, Shirahana, thank you for being here tonight. Don't forget radiation now too. Oh, there's a whole one we can get off on, but we're just the plethora of issues tonight. All of them. But it's happening. It's a confluence. Now all we need is a meltdown. Okay. Poppy asks, question: has such a big jump in record temperatures happened before the 7 to 8 degrees?
You're talking about global temperatures, you think? Uh,
I would imagine
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, I'm trying to think. Maybe in the distant past, with the um, at the end, like 250 million years ago, there was a, but
Mhm.
I don't think it happened that fast. I mean, we're talking. Some of the climate models are talking about 6+ degrees by 2100 or something. I mean, something crazy like that in such a short time scale. I don't know if it's ever happened before at that kind of speed, so fast. I mean, the Earth has faced very cold temperature drops before that have gotten Earth very cold, like the asteroid impact 66 million years ago. lowered the temperature of the Earth, I think, about 14 degrees Celsius. I mean, it got very cold, but the kind of rise in temperature, it comes from having so much greenhouse emissions pumped into the atmosphere so fast, and it's just something humanity is been able to do much more effectively than nature.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say the only knowledge I have of this, of course, in my private research is of the PETM, the Paleocene
Yeah,
Eocene Thermal. And during that period of time, we saw a maximum emission rate of CO2 in the atmosphere reach somewhere between zero point 0.5 to 1.5 ppm per year over the span of 10 to 20,000 years. And so, like you say, and the result of that warming was an episode of 200,000 years. And at the end of that 200,000 years, temperatures had reached between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius. Now, notice that is very, very, like you say, Nick, different than what we face today. What we face today is on a scale that is really incomprehensible in terms of the last 300 million years of geologic planetary history. So what we face today is truly unknown. We are at the frontier in terms of climate. Scientists warn that actually we've moved today, the atmosphere, 3 million, 4 million years back in the atmospheric past. And by 2030, we'll be close to 20 million years back in the atmospheric past. And of course, if we are on your type of trajectory, by the end of the century, we would have moved the atmospheric conditions back beyond 300 million years by 2100. So that sort of change is going to certainly have quite, I mean, we use the word catastrophic, but, catastrophic is the word that we're using to describe 2 degrees of global temperature. So what does it really mean to talk about 4 degrees or 5 degrees or 6 degrees or higher? Is really beyond our language to even verbalize. So it is, as Sandy has said, the most important decisions rest on us today. And increasingly, what we can preserve, if we're talking about negotiating tables, what we can preserve, what we can save, is less and less as we delay action.
Well, Poppy just quickly said she was asking about modern records. So, she wanted just to clarify. Okay, let's see. It is getting to where we've been on now an hour and 18. We are rocking and rolling. All right, Gary has a question. Gary's was, can we ask these guys what area of the country do you guys think it would be best survivable? Is there an area in the United States that might seem better than another one? Or even in the world, if you have an idea. I mean, I've been told different things. Take a stab at it.
I don't know if there is any area that's survivable, because I mean, survival means food, water, shelter. Those are the basic human needs, physical human needs, anyways. And shelter can be destroyed by something, and food can be prevented from growing because of heat or the nature of the soil or something else. And water can be eliminated by drought. I mean, and all those things are happening all around the world. I mean, you can come here to Nebraska 2 years ago and we had the floods destroy everything. You go to Bahamas and you get annihilated by a hurricane. You go to Seattle and you can roast like you're in Phoenix.
Oh my God.
Well, I mean, there really is no safe place from climate chaos, and I mean, it's even worse if you're depending on food to be grown elsewhere and brought to you, because say this region of the country becomes a desert. Okay, they say, oh, you could grow food up in northern Canada and a bountiful agricultural zone it'll become, but is the soil suitable for that? Are they getting droughts? They may not be getting the extreme heat you're seeing in, say, the US by that point, but are they getting droughts? You can still have drought and then have great temperatures and still have tons of drought, or too much rainfall, or melting permafrost is releasing mercury into the environment and poisoning the food. There's a lot of issues with the effect of climate chaos on the ability of civilization to remain cohesive and be able to do the things that it does to be civilized, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I know Gary has a. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just saying Gary has a reason for asking specifically because he's into and I've been talking to him a bit into communities and sustainable communities, as sustainable as they could be.
Understand is that the planet, when we talk about climate change, you have to understand that the entire planet is changing. The surface and the oceans. Okay, it's not just the atmospheric conditions. The United States, the continental United States, at a world that's 3 degrees Celsius warmer, the continental United States is a desert. Okay, the only places that would be even somewhat suitable for human habitation would be the
Greenland.
It would be the top of the northern states. So Maine, parts of Connecticut, Massachusetts, West New York, top of Montana, North Dakota, states like that, the top of Idaho. These would be the only states that would have any zones that would be suitable for human habitation. And again, just because we say suitable for human habitation doesn't mean that those are sustainable places for certain levels of population. And so what I think that people have to also think about is that are the Canadians going to accept in a time where it's not just about the zones of habitation, but it's also about the transition zones we'll be going through from their previous state to another state, which is going to make it much, much more difficult to grow food. So it's not as if just because they're in warmer climates now that those warmer climates are stable. Those warmer climates are going to be incredibly unstable because they're still going to be in transition. And so you have to imagine the Canadians then, who would be on the precipice of not feeding themselves, they would not want hundreds of millions of U.S. Americans crossing the border and developing their land, and thus increasing governmental, social, and agricultural pressures for them to deal with. And so, people have this idea that, the Canadians are nice and friendly, they're going to let us across the border. No, the Canadians are going to have the same reaction we are to those coming across the Rio Grande.
Yeah, bingo. Soil. I've learned so much over the last few years, but specifically this year, about soil and how important this is. It's critical to have healthy soil. Yeah. And if we don't have a healthy environment, are we going to have healthy soil? And how long are we going to be able to buy the things that I use in my garden, which are organic, but how long are we going to be able to get that kind of material to make the soil workable if you don't have wonderful soil? I mean, that's, people want to survive on their property, but you have to have the accoutrements that go along with it to make it work.
Yeah, I was going to add to what Antonio said about, they're going to be as have the same reaction that we have to, the folks crossing the Rio Grande. I can hear a lot of Americans saying at that point in a 3-degree warmer world is that means war. They're going to, whoever is the strong still has resources to fight a war. That's going to be warfare, and that's really the whole point. Of a lot of the problems that are going to crop up in a warmer world is political and instability and warfare where people are going to be like, I have the biggest stick still. I want your land. Or you're going to either let our people onto the land or we're going to take it by force. And a lot of countries that are allies now aren't going to be so friendly to
No.
each other very soon, I
No.
think. Yeah.
And that's another whole aspect because we are just fighting mother effers.
Well, there's the
Human
whole
beings.
phrase about lifeboat Britain. And the concept is that there are going to be some places that um, get let off relatively unscathed in the climate crisis, even at 3 or 4 degrees global average, because places like Britain have the ameliorating impacts of being surrounded by water. But Britain is going to only comfortably be able to feed, if that's comfortable is a good word to use, 60 million people. The Eurozone today is populated with over 580 million people. And the Mediterranean is on its transition back to a desert, into the Sahara. And so this is going to destabilize the so-called Schengen Treaty that allows the free access across European borders. I can't imagine that treaty has more than 10 to 15 years in it. And this is the real type of global stabilization that we're going to see. And I think what the COVID pandemic had showed to us is that our international globalized systems are not ready for this level of disruption. And once disruptions occur, it's not at all the case that they can easily be repaired. That when we see disruptions in the supply chains, those disruptions could have impacts that last, and this is under normal conditions, for months to years at a time. So imagine if we are living in a world where our supply chains are facing continual disruption.
Yes, it's going to happen, and it's happening. And the cargo ship industry is a big thing right now. Right now, always people are calling to change that and change the whole way we get our food. So, I mean, my only little comment here is if we're going to do anything, it's going to have to be local, and we really are going to have to eat what we have and not import if things really SHTF. If they do. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but that's exactly what's going to happen. All right, guys, we are going on. Let me make a comment with Heidi. She said in Canada, they were talking about it in the chat, is conducting genocide and ecological ethnic cleansing of their indigenous relatives, especially with tar sands extraction zones in Alberta and all of the mercury poison. Methane gas emissions from their mega dams, especially in the James Bay ecosystem south of Hudson Bay. I would not want to support such an economy. So nobody. I mean, Norway, they just gave the green light for drilling permits. So nobody is stopping. It's not happening. Okay, guys, let's see if we can, because we are approaching my time zone saying I can't sit any longer. So Jim asked, where do you think Nebraska and North Carolina will be with climate change in 5 years? Nick and Antonio, your states, respectively. And I think we can end with that, and you guys give us a good closing punch in the head.
Well, Nebraska, I know, is getting warmer. It's been swinging between drought and a lot of rain. We had 2 years ago, it was dealing with tons and tons of rain and moisture and flooding issues on the Missouri River and all the damage that came from that. And then we dried out. Right now, we're kind of just sitting pretty, sort of staying out of the drought that's farther to the north in South Dakota and North Dakota. Hopefully it stays that way, but over the next 5 years, it's just hard to know what's going to happen. I would imagine this area of the country may just swing more between those two extremes, between the heat and dryness and the and the wet periods, and the wet periods will get worse and the drought will get worse.
Whew, boy, this is pretty heavy. What do you think, North
Yeah, and
Carolina?
I think for North Carolina, I'll describe it as what I think our concerns will be. And I do think our concerns over the next couple years will continue to be drought in our western region and the regions in our mountains. We've unfortunately seen more and more wildfires in our Smoky Mountains. They're not smoky because of wildfires historically. They're smoky because of the transpiration that happens in the mountains. But more of that transpiration, that water vapor, is giving way to smoke. And of course, in our Piedmont region, I think we're going to continue to get the continued droughts that we've been getting off and on, and then sprinkled in with several deluges. And of course, our coast, North Carolina, is one of the most vulnerable states in the United States for sea rise. And the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration shows that North Carolina will sustain catastrophic levels of sea rise by 2030, 2035. 1 foot of sea rise does absolute horrendous damage to the North Carolina coast. And then also our I think potential for the most grabbing headlines impact from climate change is going to be the threat of superstorms. North Carolina, since 2018, has now been hit by 2 100-year storms, Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Matthew, devastating our state both on the east and west side.
So it's dire everywhere. I mean, it's dire in Florida. It's dire in the Crane State where the building fell. Right now, the people are trying to figure out, is this going to become something new and happen more often? Oh, there's a lot going on. But I thank you for covering what you did. I want to thank everybody in the chat. There's just too many people with us right now, but thank you everyone for coming. Don't forget about our little join me, little buy me a coffee. It is in the show notes. And Nick, I want to thank you, and I want to wish you good luck in your upcoming endeavor and move and all that, because it's really going to be life-changing. But we will be with you, and you will be with us.
Thank you.
Anybody got a parting shot here? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Okay,
Thank you.
well, until we meet again, which could be, I think, next Wednesday, I return with Jennifer. And Jennifer, thank you for watching. Everybody, we really, really do appreciate you. And we are here. We are a little family, and it's not going to change. It's not going to change until we're forced to change it, or I can't move. One or the other. All right, guys. Peace out. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.